Yeah, so I'll just introduce myself, and then we'll go through kind of go through this little PowerPoint, which is what I've been using to help explain to people what we're trying to do. So my role right now, I have like a lot of hats. My official role, I'm a pastor with a church called New Life Community Church, which New Life is mostly well known outside of Chicago because the pastor of New Life is the current president of Moody Bible Institute. So some of you might know Mark Job, if you know the world of Moody at all. But in Chicagoland, New Life is a church that meets throughout the city of Chicago. I think it's 27 different locations that meet around the city of Chicago. Of those 27 different locations, there's a variety of congregations. Maybe like 10 of those have multiple congregations. Some are because of different language groups, which just means Spanish and Mandarin. We have no other. Those are all of our language groups are Spanish and Mandarin, and then English. It's a non-denominational church. Jim was just asking, is it connected to any background? And I think we like technically are, but I don't even know what it is as a pastor. And if we were to do a poll of all the pastors, most of us would, I think almost only Pastor Mark knows. No, and so it's pretty de-emphasized, whatever that history is. It might not even be officially connected anymore. But started as a small, Mark Job was a missionary kid who grew up in Spain, came to Moody Bible Institute. And when you are at Moody, you have to do some type of like practical curriculum usually, where you go out, what do they call it? Practical, I don't know the word, they call them PCM, that's the word they call it, I don't remember what it stands for, but some type of practical ministry. And so he went out to a place in the neighborhood called Back of the Yards, which is south side Chicago. If you ever had to read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair back in the day, it's about that neighborhood. And so he went to that neighborhood to work with an old church that is an old Russian Orthodox church. It's got like the big, onion on the onion design, and there have not been a lot of Russian people in Back of the Yards for a long time, and so it was a Latino community. He spoke Spanish because of Spain, so he started working with a group there, and the group was mostly English-speaking Latino, and married someone from the neighborhood, decided to stay and planted the church. They kind of formed as a church, and the church grew really rapidly. So in its first years, I think it started in 1986. Which I always say is it the second greatest thing to happen in Chicago in 1986, because the greatest thing that happened was January of '86, the Bears won the Super Bowl. It's a little radical, but like, man, New Life being born was the second best thing. Oh, my own name, Chris. Yeah, Chris Ophus, which one? We've been together this whole time. So for anyone watching this video later, that's who I am. Yeah, and so the church grew and was sort of. It's interesting. Jim. Actually, with Ralph Neighbor connected to the Cell Church movement, went and did a training there, because in the beginning, the church quickly outgrew its building, and it went from 18 people to like 50 people to like 300 people in a very short period of time, and then just continued to grow from there. And I feel like in many ways it was just a God moment for that to happen. It's a thing the Spirit of God was doing in that community. There was, I would say, reaching English-speaking Latinos in Chicago. There was like English-speaking Mexicans on the south side of Chicago. There was almost nobody doing anything in the entire city. That was like a growing group of people. There were a lot of things like amongst Puerto Rican community in the north side of Chicago, but it was almost like a demographic that didn't exist like 15 years before Pastor Mark got there. It's like the children of Mexican immigrants who had grown up in the southwest side of Chicago. And so it was just like ripe for just good ripe soil, the kind of tree you could go up to shake it and all the fruit comes out. And so it grew really quickly, and then as it moved from building to building, did like basically became a cell church. And so during the week, people would meet in their cell groups, and it grew really rapidly because of that. And they were very intentional. I wasn't part of the church in that time, like to the point where they would like every single Sunday meet with all of the cell group leaders before service and pray together. And then for the discipleship process that they used, would like put on the screen at church everybody who was in the like 5-book process of discipleship, and put their name and where they were in the process, like on the screen at church, and celebrate everyone who advanced through a book. So they were like fairly like radically cell church, and like a lot of radical cell churches were growing, especially during that season. And then I think at some point there was Bill Bright did this, tried to encourage as many people as he could to fast and pray for 40 days. And I was gratefully not a part of that. I was maybe not even a believer yet at that point, but they did it, and they fasted and prayed, and he felt like God put on his heart 1%. They kind of, the pastoral team at that point had grown. They just had this idea, like 1%. Like, what would it look like to reach 1% of the city of Chicago? Which, the good thing of Chicago is because it's declining population, you just get closer every day to your goal. It's the strange way to reach your goal, is just hemorrhage your population, and eventually you get there. But that was 30,000 people, and so we started thinking about it and realizing we're never going to reach. There's nowhere to reach 30,000 people. There's only actually 3 buildings you could have 30,000 people in the entire city of Chicago, at one place watching one thing. Which, anyone want to guess what they are? Right now.
Soldier Field,
Wrigley Field.
Guaranteed Rate Field.
Yep, those are the only 3, and they're not very good winter options. And so we kind of realized, all right, this vision is literally no longer, this moving and seeking bigger buildings is never ever going to be the way to get to this vision. We need to multiply. I feel like at that point, it was the very beginning of multi-site as sort of like a thing, and it was the beginning of people like Tim Keller and others talking about like trying to encourage church planting, saying the best way to reach new people is by planting churches. So I would say we switched from being a cell church to being a church that multiplied less cell groups, but more like multiplied locations. And as we multiplied locations, our small groups, interestingly, stopped being cell groups and started being more like traditional small groups, which I would say are traditional small groups are like assimilation groups. They're usually people come, they show up at something, you realize you can't experience church where you're just sitting down and listening to someone talk and then leaving afterwards. So you need to have church somewhere, and you need to get people connected, and so you do small groups and you assimilate people into the small groups. So our small group strategy, I think, went from being like the tip of the spear of the move to being a way you assimilated people who were coming to new congregations. And what's interesting is that we noticed we planted a lot of congregations, and one of those congregations I planted in the neighborhood of Little Village. We have 2 locations in the neighborhood of Little Village, which is exactly where we are now, the exact streets of Albany Park, but 60 blocks south of here. If you could just walk directly 60 blocks south, you would be at the location where I pastor at. And we started 2 locations in our own neighborhood because we were captivated by that vision of 1%. And we said, okay, well, 1% of Little Village is like 90,000 people, was at that point. We're getting closer every day. People stop coming. And we said, that's 900 people. So if we're going to reach 900 people, we can't do that in one building. We need multiple locations throughout Little Village in order to reach that goal. So let's multiply. And so we use the word multiply. It's not the way I would use the word multiply right now, but we would say we're multiplying, and the language we would use was we want to see a movement happen. We want to be a movement church and see a move of God. And because I also worked as a part of a mission organization, I had raised support and lived in Mexico for 3 years before I moved to Chicago. I'm from Chicago, but I lived in Mexico for 3 years, and then moved back. When I moved back, I wanted to be in a community where there's a lot of Mexicans. So I said, where is the Mexican community of Chicago? And they said, the neighborhood of Little Village. And so that's where I moved to. And because I was a part of that organization, when I would go, One Collective is the name of the organization that I was raising support with. When I would go to conferences, the same word movement would be used, but connected to disciple-making movements, because people who were working specifically with Muslim people groups in East Africa as well, there were some connections. I think they've been trained by Jerry Charlesdale, I'm not sure, but have been, were connected, knew the book Miraculous Movements. One of the guys who was involved in doing work with kind of cousins had gone to Ethiopia and seen the movement, and so we knew a little bit about it. Yeah, so we kind of I knew that language, and I had heard that City Team, the organization City Team, had done similar things with Latinos in California, and I started feeling like I led small groups. I love small groups. I became a pastor of a location. We started an English and a Spanish congregation maybe 8 years ago. Worked really closely with the other location in the neighborhood. And we would always talk about multiplication, multiplying small groups, multiplying leaders, but I just felt dissatisfied. Felt like we're not actually, I looked at myself, I was leading one of the locations, and the other guy was leading the other location. It was a guy named Paco, who was a great guy, but neither one of us are from Little Village, neither one of us had a story that was similar to Little Village. Neither one of us was very reproducible in Little Village in terms of our life story, and we were doing small groups, and we'd always talk about multiplying small groups, but they were never happening. And we were talking about multiplying new locations, but we just realized a lot of our leaders are really good. They're like good shepherds. They're good at working with people, but they're not going to be like allowed to be pastors of a roughly traditional American church, because a lot of the skills that you need to pastor a church in America are business admin. I mean, a lot of the skill set that's required, and some of those things are so easy if you grow up here, you don't even think about them, but we're working with a lot of immigrants who went to school until like 4th grade, 5th grade, who don't have emails, and they're great leaders. You know, I have one of my friends has a tamale business, sells tamales to like 6 or 7 restaurants. He has like 10 or 12 people out on the street every day selling tamales on the street. I mean, he just runs like a fleet of tamales all around Chicago, bought his own home in cash, but he does not, do you have an email? He doesn't do any business admin. Everything is cash and notebooks. You know, that's the entire business. And I'm like, hey, you're like a great businessman, but you do not have like traditional business admin skills. And if you're gonna be a part of our church as a pastor, you can't, because those are the required skills. So we started looking for like, how can we really see multiplication happen? We're always using the word multiplication. How can we really see movement happen? We're seeing addition, and we're not really seeing movement. And so I think probably like a lot of people get into DMM, we had like a good holy dissatisfaction with how things were going and wanted to see stuff happen. The other thing is we have tons of connections to all over Latin America through our church, and people come and go all the time from our neighborhood to back home, and they would often say to us, can you start a New Life Church in my town? And we would say, no, we can't. Like, there's literally no way we could. I mean, who would be the pastor of that church? How would we, you know, who's gonna run the website? You know, I don't know, like all of the normal stuff. It's like literally there's no possible way we could start a church in your town. And I remember thinking, man, I wish we had like a way to help them plant churches, because they're literally saying, I came to this city, to Chicago, I encountered Jesus in the city, and I'm moving back, or my entire my relatives back home, they don't know Jesus, and we have like nothing for you. So we would do some mission trips to go visit family members. I remember visiting one family member, one household, they had set up everything for a trip. They themselves couldn't go back to visit their family because they didn't have papers. They said, hey, we could go, but the return ticket is pretty expensive for us, but why don't you go? And they organized everything, and we got there. And I've been a missionary in Mexico for 3 years, and when we went to this first house, they had set everything up, and we recorded their testimonies, and we said, hey, you know, your relatives went to America to escape this, you know, there's a really violent community in Acapulco, and a very poor community. They went to get a better life, but they encountered something better. The reason we're here is they want you to know about it. I mean, we walked in, it was like the entire extended family, a huge meal, and we just showed the video with their testimonies, and then said, hey, they found Jesus. Does anyone want to follow Jesus? And literally the very first household I went to, doing that intentionally, we saw more people come to Christ than I did in my entire 3 years as a missionary, because grandma's door is always open. You know, you don't have to raise support, you don't have to learn language, you don't have to, it's grandma's house. You don't have to ask permission to show up, and you don't need to gain relational trust because you're connected to family back here. So, but we didn't have any way to follow up with that. So learning more about movements, we got excited. Our first sort of foray into movements was more in the T4T world. If some of you know T4T, I think T4T feels more palatable sometimes to pastors because it feels a little bit more like traditional evangelism. It's like you go out and you share the gospel in like a some way, the 3 circles or the bridge or whatever, and if people respond yes, then you follow up with them. And me and Paco, this other pastor, we got super excited, and so we did a training. We leveraged all of our capital that we had as pastors, which, as you know, if you're pastors, is limited, and we leveraged it, and we said, everyone come out, we're doing this training, and we did this big training event, and nothing really happened at all. And then we kind of talked to some people and said, hey, we did the training, nobody did anything. And they said, well, you need to probably walk with people a little bit more than just like one big event. And then they also said, probably don't train everybody in your church, probably just find some people who are interested in your church and work with those people, because they're going to show up at your training because you're the pastor and you said you have to show up, but they might not really want to. So try to find those who are interested. So we got a smaller group our second round through, and we went through training in my backyard in the summer, which felt like a great idea. We felt like, yeah, backyard, and we just like fed mosquitoes the entire summer. It was not a good idea, but I was like, we're making it reproducible by doing it in the backyard. I don't really know. And we actually saw some good fruit. We saw our first, I felt like God gave us like good initial fruit, gave us like a super slang dunk person of peace. Pastor Paco, who actually visited him, he was someone who came to church. So the homework was visit somebody at their house. Try to go instead of having them come. So he went, he saw him, he actually came to church. He was someone who would come in every week and then leave really quickly and never stick around. So he actually went to him and said, hey, can I come to your house this week? I'd like to visit you. And he said, sure. And he got there, and it was like all of his family members were there and a lot of coworkers, and he gave his life to the Lord that day. Like a few weeks later, he was baptized. A month after that, he baptized his first few people. I think in like a year and a half, around 30 adults were baptized out of that guy. In fact, this guy, I would say, probably baptized the most adults in the entire city of Chicago in that year. I would guess, as far as like adult converts, if I had to guess. I don't know who else, and there's other people baptizing, but I don't know who else saw like 30 adults who at the beginning of that year were not believers as adults be baptized. I don't know, I couldn't tell you who saw more of that in that 1 year. They felt an incredible weight to become a traditional church. This is something I never could have guessed would have happened, but they started meeting in his store. He runs like a little used appliance store, and people would show up in his church. This is like so Book of Acts that I did not know would happen, and they would say, the way you're doing this is bad. I'm a pastor, I will be the pastor of your church now. And like literal, I don't know where these people came from. They would just show up and say, like, I'm the pastor, I'm gonna be the pastor of this church because you guys have no pastor. And the guy was very intimidated with like big words that they would throw at him, and like would literally like just sit, like move him out. And so it reminded me of just like Acts when Paul says, like, I know when I leave, wolves are going to come in and they're going to try to take over the church. Like we just saw it happen with this guy. It's like, I can't believe there are random people who say they're pastors who have no flocks, who just show up at other people's flocks and say, I'm the pastor now of this. But that happened, and eventually they just felt the weight of becoming a traditional church, and they did. They said, we're going to become a traditional church. They bought pews actually and put them in the store, and it just died. It just like tanked afterwards. And we told them, like, hey, we don't think you are actually cut out to be that style of pastor. Like that's not what you've learned how to do, and not like a super eloquent speaker, to be honest. And he just was like, no, we got to do it. People want it, and it just killed it, And so, but seeing all those adults come to faith, some of them eventually came back to our church, was like enough to get the appetite wet. But I realized with T4T, my struggle was I couldn't get anyone to do it other than Paco, who's already the pastor, my wife, who she baptized some people from her school that she led to faith. Like hardcore people, another guy who's now in Kyrgyzstan as a missionary. Like these are all like pretty hardcore people. I couldn't get anyone regular to do it. Like literally no one. We trained 3 circles, everything. I could get absolutely nobody to do it. And so then I remember DMM, and I was like, I think asking somebody if they would like to look at scripture together, just way less abrasive. And I myself would have had a couple situations of people where I felt like, no matter what I'm saying to this guy, what he's hearing is, do you want to change your religion? That's just the way, no matter what he's like, I'm Mexican, so I'm Catholic, because to be Mexican is to be Catholic. And what I hear you saying is, will you stop being Mexican, basically. And it wasn't that they weren't interested in Jesus, they weren't ready to say like goodbye to their entire national identity, And so I felt like, let's try DMM instead. And I didn't know anyone else doing DMM, but I got connected to this Lance Corley, who he was working with the same organization I was a part of. He was a part of the Ephesus group in Chicago, and so he kind of through a good way God connected us, which we usually didn't talk very often because he was involved in Russia and I was involved in Little Village, but he invited me to come to this Ephesus group, and met Dave Heidenreich, and Dave Heidenreich said, hey, we can train you. We had already read some books about it. I read like Contagious Discipleship. So he trained us, and we decided, okay, this time instead of trying to just do lots of training with everyone, we're gonna try to recruit, like more meaningfully recruit a team. And so this was maybe 4 years ago, I would say, that we decided like, let's really recruit a team well. And so we cast vision. We said, this time, don't say yes to this, like pray about it. Just legitimately pray about it. And if you feel like God is leading you to do this, do it. And so we had our first kind of team that decided we're going to do DMM. And we asked them for certain commitments. We asked them for the first commitment to every week come to training, which is going to be 2 hours, an hour and a half, but not counting the half hour of coming late. I even came late to this meeting, even when I was at it. So we cannot not come late to meetings. So we said, all right, and 2 hours for training. We said, we want you to commit to two hours a week that you are in the harvest, whatever, connecting with people. And that might mean visiting people you already know who are far from God. That might mean connecting in some service way, or it might mean prayer walking, but either way, it means intentionally connecting with people who are far from God. You have to commit to that. And we asked them to commit to pray, and so they ended up finding a time where they prayed together as a team. And then on Sunday morning, they stopped coming to our church. So we actually said, why don't you guys meet together and do this? Become like a DMM church that does discovery group as church on Sunday morning. So that was the biggest ask, because we were saying, you're going to stop coming on Sunday morning. And for a lot of these guys who were good leaders, that actually meant doing way less on Sunday morning. I felt like in many ways we were saying, we're going to like lower the ball on Sunday. We're going to lower the bar pretty drastically on Sunday for you. But we're going to raise it during the rest of the week, because there were people who already were there, usually from 8 till 2 anyways on a Sunday. These were people who were pretty involved, and so they said yes. And I think having them do it together was really helpful for them, and they committed to training every week. So we had time to really train, and then after we were done with the training, we would still meet for coaching, and then during the week they would go out and pray for people, and they were able to find a bunch of different people apiece. Some of the people were potential people of peace. They got things started and they fell apart, but several homes kind of stuck, and so they got into like several discovery groups running in different homes, and that was really, really encouraging. What was interesting with them was in the summer, the goal was that they would just start different churches. The discovery groups would start their own churches, but people, they would say like, hey, this is going to be church, and the people were lost, were like, this is not church. And they're like, yeah, it is, like in the Bible it's church. I'm like, yeah, it's not church. And so we had to figure out what to do. They're like, what do we do? Do we let them go to a church with us? So we decided, and it was the summer, we said, why don't you invite them to a place outside, so you don't and then just do discovery church the same way you do it, but let them come to it and just split everything up into smaller groups. And it was interesting, that worked, because they felt like, okay, that counts as church. And several of them didn't go. They were just they still only went on Tuesday or Thursday, whenever they met in their house, but they just felt good. Like they were already used to, as Catholics, kind of used to not having a church they don't go to. And so they were like, all right, now you're legit, because there's a thing on Sunday that I don't go to. But now at least I know it's something. And so, I don't know, these are where things don't go the way you would think. So they would meet, and some of the people would come to this boulevard. Chicago has this boulevard system on the west side. So they'd meet on a boulevard, and we printed up a banner, and we'd say, discover God on the boulevard. And people could come and do a big oversized discovery group during the winter. And then they would eat together afterwards and hang out. And several of the people from the different houses of peace would come, and a whole bunch of people would not come. Randomly, other people did start coming to that just because it was outside, and then they became doors to their own spot. What's interesting is in the winter, we said, you can't meet outside in the winter. What should we do? And said, well, we'll just for the winter, which is, it's the Midwest, so the winter's, it's when it's not good to meet outside is October to May. So it's a pretty big chunk of the year. But we'll just go back into the houses in the winter. So this is the strange thing that we've been working, which I don't know what kind of principle, it's just what's happening, where during the summer they meet outside and in a big group, and in the winter they meet in the homes and in smaller groups because they can't. So there's right now 3 of those homes that are running out of that group. COVID made things very challenging, but right now, as it's kind of coming out of COVID, they have 3 homes they meet during the winter, and then in the summer they all come together, which is an interesting thing. That was our first group. The other thing that happened during COVID was in COVID, there was the great birth of online church and the future of online church, which happened, I think, in March and April of 2020. And then there was the great death of online church in May of 2020. So we were like most locations that everyone rallied to go online during March, because it was this crazy moment we were living in. April is Easter, and then somewhere around the end of that time, I mean, we just knew you can look at your data. It's like nobody's watching this thing anymore. And at some point there's like, there's 6 of us watching and 3 of them are in the room with me. It's like my son and my wife and me. I don't know who the other 3 are who are watching this thing. So we started talking to the congregation. We had wanted to see more people. I mean, COVID really was difficult. I remember specifically the marriage scholar saying, the absolute worst thing you can possibly do is go to somebody's house. That is the worst thing you can do, because you're going to only be with your own family. Don't go to anybody else's house. I'm like, oh man, that's not very easy. But we just told people, like, hey, we know that you are not watching. And they're like, oh, we got our pastor. I'm like, no, you're not. and we said, it's okay that you're not. It's totally boring. Like, it's outrageously boring. The reason you don't like it is because nobody really wants to watch amateur bands with bad sound on their phones. Like, I don't even want to watch amateur bands live. And it's just not very good. It's not fun. It's not engaging. We're not mad at you for not watching. I only watch because I'm the pastor and I have to watch. But we do need you to be in community with other people. And so what if you probably already have a bubble. You already have like your COVID bubble of people that you're hanging out with. We're like, what if we were to show you how to do that together? And how to do church together. And they're like, well, who will preach? I'm like, well, no one's going to preach, but we'll just show you how to do it. So if you would like to do that, if you'd be interested in having that happen, this was in the summer of 2020. There was Andy Crouch wrote an article, which I think turned out to be like really prophetic, because he wrote it in March of 2020. Some of you might have seen it. It was in well-known leadership website, I don't remember anymore. But he said, like, some people are thinking this is going to be a storm, like a blizzard. And I think it was called Leading Beyond the Blizzard was the article. And he said, this is not a blizzard, because blizzards come and they go. And he said, some people think this is a winter. He said, this is not a winter either. This is not going to be a season. He said, this is a mini ice age. And you need to, right now, start thinking about, what do you want to see at the other end of the ice age? Because ice ages, when they come through, they remake the landscape. And so I think, that was March of 2020, and he was saying, this is not going away for years. This is going to be the next several years of our life. So leaders, pastors, start thinking about that. So we were like, okay, what do we wish would happen? We actually want to see a movement happen. And so maybe COVID is an opportunity in that way. And once we started noticing that all of our participation was dying, that was a good open door to say, you're not wanting to connect anyway, so let's try something different if you'd like to try it. And so I think there were like 12 or 13 different groups like that said, yeah, we'd like to do that. And in order to do that, we said, you have to come every week to a training. We're going to train you how to do it, and you have to stay connected to us. We need to know that you're still connected to the body. And so come every week to a training, and a connection point, and then you can run it in your own house. And so people did that. A lot of people did it outside throughout that whole summer, and people liked it. What was interesting is people who I think were not, if you were to say, would you want to try church in a different way and invite your neighbors, they were, before the COVID, most of them were like, it's good that there's a team that's doing it, but it seems like the pastors really want to do this, but I don't want to do that. And COVID forced them to do it, and they liked it. And what was interesting and surprising was a lot of people with youth liked it a lot, because they said, what's surprising is that my young people are not just sitting in church on their phones, like the entire service I'm having to tell them, get off of your phone. They're reading and participating and giving answers, and their answers are really good good answers about what's going on in the text. And so we had people really enjoyed it. They're like, this is really fun. This is a fun way to do church. So I remember then the fall of 2020 came, and it was just like COVID city. Everybody got sick. It was so terrible. So things kind of died down, and then we relaunched again in 2021. The things kind of roughly went going, but just stuff fell apart through that season. And then 2021 again, we said, let's do it again for outside. And several people joined. Most of the same people said, let's do it again. But at some point we realized this is not going to turn into a movement. This is actually just little Christian clubs that have discovered a new way to do church. And it is a more fun way to do church, especially if you don't have a role on Sunday morning. If you go from I just sit and I watch to we all participate together and we read together and our kids give answers, and it's super fun. And so we're like, hey, but it's not, this vision is beyond just you guys. We need to organize this a little bit more. At the same time, the guy whose church died, that I mentioned in the beginning, he came back to us and said, hey, my whole church died and I would like to get going. We said, you can get going again, but if you're going to get going again, you need to do what we're saying and not, don't make it into like, take all the pews out. Why do you have a pew in a store? Like, take your pews out. So he kind of joined back in. And with that, we decided, like, suddenly there were like 12 maybe of these churches that were not meeting on Sunday morning with us. They were meeting somewhere else on Sunday morning together. We're like, okay, let's start organizing them. And those that haven't really been trained in DMM, other than how to do a discovery group, let's begin to say this is going to be an actual mission, like an actual ministry that we're going to do more formally. And so this is what we did. I just took our New Life logo and I put a bunch of arrows on it, which that's too many arrows to reproduce as far as logos go. But people started saying, can you explain to me, like, what is this? What is this thing that's happening? So this is kind of how we explained it. This is sort of like how we understood microchurches. We started calling them microchurch, which maybe you could use the word discovery church. The reason we did that is because New Life leadership was like, what is this? What's going on with you guys? Half of your church has not come back after COVID. They're meeting out there. Like, what are you doing? And just the word microchurch in certain church planning circles is sort of like in vogue right now. And so, but it also is meaningless at the same time. Nobody really knows what that word means. They just know it's different than big church. And it means different things to different people. Like the KC Underground uses it in one way, and the Tampa Underground, they're part of the same group. They use it in a slightly different way. And I've met 10 people who do microchurches, and each one does it incredibly differently, which to me means it's like an empty word, but it's like an accepted word, and I needed to get like permission to be able to keep going. So we kind of talked with people who are above me within New Life and above Paco, and said, well, we're creating these things called microchurches, and there's some interest already was some interest within New Life coming out of the pandemic, because I think the pandemic exposed a lot of things. I don't know what percentage of the church has like not come back, still in America as a whole. I think I mentioned like my brother, I think I just mentioned it to you guys. My brother, he was launched with his denomination. They launched 5 churches before the pandemic, and 4 of the 5 in the city closed during the pandemic. So I think there's like a sense that like, hey, maybe things are not working as well as we thought they were. There was this meme that would go around during the pandemic that said like the church church hasn't been canceled, the church has been deployed. I don't know if anyone saw it. And I was like, it's been deployed to the couch. Like, this is the worst deployment ever. Like, just imagine like the Marines, the few, the proud, the guy on the couch. Like, that's it's like, this is not. So I think we tried to say like, no, church, church is it's not just the building. It's watching our event, even if you're in bed. And and there's just been enough dissatisfaction that has come out of that people are like, I don't know. And because so many churches in a city like Chicago, a lot of churches are transient, especially like kind of, say like young professional type churches, they're highly transient. And a lot of things had to look at the fact that like, hey, we mostly just reach Christians who move into our city and then they leave, but we replace them with new Christians. If we have enough services, we become the one that the Christians go to. And during the pandemic, they stopped coming, and they moved out at an even greater rate than they did normally, and they were replaced with nobody. And so it was just sort of like this experience that so many people were having, and realizing how many people had sort of fallen away. Like for so many churches, even within our church, it was just shocking how many elders never came back, how many like people just started, all around the church world wondering like, almost like, what is the quality of our fruit of this model? I'm not sure if the quality of our fruit was as good as we thought it was, because this was not really persecution. This was sitting on your couch, and we fell away. The couch killed us, and so like that's not good. So I think there's openness, and we use the word microchurch just because it's accepted. So what we would say, this thing, by the way, is supposed to be this arch in Little Village. Little Village has this famous arch, which is the entranceway of the neighborhood. Actually, it was a gift of a Mexican president, and it's like the entrance to our community. So we would say this is New Life in Little Village. So we have English congregation, we have Spanish congregations. That's what we've had for a long time. And they have a clear vision statement. Probably your church has, some kind of vision or whatever. The one, New Life, is to be a family of love that cooperates with God, to make fully devoted, fruitful followers of Jesus. That's the official New Life vision. Underneath that is our discipleship path. And there's sort of either books or trainings or steps that go with each one of those symbols. That's sort of our Our discipleship path is a traditional church. Most of the time it happens like one-on-one. And we have all sorts of different things like small groups and youth groups and Awana, Sunday ministries, events, all sorts of other stuff. That's what we do. We stopped trying to change it like we did the first time when we learned about T4T. The first time we were like, church, we're switching models. And everyone was like, what? Is there going to be a snack after this meeting? And so we're like, we're not even going to try to change this. This is a part of a church that has multiplied around Chicago. It's been around for a long time. We're not even attempting to get the regular church to change. And because it's a sort of a little bit of a larger church, it is hard to change a DNA, especially a DNA that is really embedded, not even just our location, but through a network of 27 churches that are legally connected to each other. So we're not even gonna switch that. I still believe as DMM, you want to start families of love and cooperate with God to make fully devoted, fruitful followers of Jesus. This is good. Then the interesting thing is that this has helped a little bit is we have something called New Life Centers, which New Life Centers is like a separate 501c3, which is a community development organization. We've had that for a long time. It does all sorts of stuff from food distribution. During the pandemic, our food distribution grew up. We're actually currently right now the largest food distributor in the entire city of Chicago is New Life in Little Village. It's like 7,000 families a week. But we do stuff with people who are involved in gangs. We do probation for every minor who's arrested on either a gun or a drug charge in our neighborhood. We do mentoring with schools, just a whole bunch of stuff. It's large. There's like 80 full-time employees that are connected to New Life Centers. So that thing is actually significantly wealthier than our church. It's just grown. And so but what's nice about that is people sort of get that New Life Centers is not the same thing as the congregation. Like most of the people who are part of it are connected to the congregation, but their work is different. Like in missiology worlds, it's sodalities and modalities. If you're had to study that, like modalities, like, the local church, and sodality is sort of these parachurch type things. And so people get that already. We said we need to, the vision of New Life Centers is to connect youth and young adults to Christ and community. They do that through mentoring, through sports, through education, street outreach, food distribution, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we said those things we're used to, we need to add another thing. What we're saying is that we're going to add a new thing that is not actually its own 501c3. And we said some of this language comes from the KC Underground. So we're calling it like a missions hub. That's a part of our church. That's like a separate. You can be a part of the congregation. You can even be a part of New Life Cities or New Life Centers, but this is like its own thing. And we've called it sort of like the New Life Missions Hub. And so we said this is our own vision for it. It's to saturate Little Village and beyond with multiplying families of faith, which microchurch. This is DMM, really. And then this we just really stole almost directly from the KC Underground. This idea that we will send out missionaries and train them and send them out to start groups with the goal of becoming microchurches. And the goal of those churches are to multiply and kind of network together, and that they would be coaching, prayer, and encouragement at the hub. And the way we send them out, our training is the habits of a multiplying disciple. So that's our training. And so these are we've said these are our three things. These are what we're doing in Little Village right now. And there's clear leadership for it, clear on-ramps for it. So we were able to bring this as COVID sort of, 6 or 7 variants ago was in a good moment. And we had a lot of people were at church again. We said we presented this to the whole church. We said, this is what we're doing. This is what it's going to mean to be New Life in Little Village. And if you would like to join any one of these things, they're not exclusive from each other. So you can be an employee of New Life Centers whose full-time job is to work with food distribution and also join the Missions Hub, which I would love if more people did that because they're already connected to a lot of lost people. Or you can go to the Sunday morning service and still join in. Before, our first team, we just totally cut them off and said, you are on your own, you've started a new microchurch, you don't even meet with us on Sunday morning. I think we realized that's pretty radical for a lot of people, and that was why pretty go-getters did it, I think, because they were the ones who were most likely to take a risk. But for a lot of the other people, what happened with the other locations, with the other DMM type churches, Discovery type churches, is that when COVID regulations relaxed, a lot of them wanted to come back, and then others needed to be trained. And so we said, hey, it doesn't have to be so either or. One of our microchurches is working with guys who are gang involved, he goes to church on Sunday. Sunday morning is not a very good time to reach getting involved young people because they go to bed when church starts. And so we're like, hey, you don't need to not come on Sunday morning. Go to Sunday morning if you like. Just don't get involved. Don't become an usher. Don't hand out bulletins. Don't just go and just sit there, because your ministry really is going to be, you're working with these guys, and they meet on Wednesday nights. That's his night that he does, that he meets with them and has seen a whole bunch of guys get baptized, which is really cool. So that's kind of how we've explained it. And yeah, so this is something that I explained to the leadership of New Life, and went through and said, this is kind of what we'll do. We send out the missionaries to live out the habits. These are things that if you've seen the habits training before, and if you haven't, you should sign up for habits training. And just kind of went through what a habits training looked like. And then we say the goal is for them to start groups, and the goal of the groups is not to be small groups. The goal of the groups is to start independent churches that will be still connected to New Life, but we're not just trying to start a small group. These are groups out of lost people, which has been a shift, because what started to happen in our group is a lot of people are like, well, let's just get together with our Christian friends and do this thing called DMM Church. It's really fun, it's more community. We said, well, the vision is to reach people who are lost, not just to only be together. So if you're a team that's meeting together with a purpose of reaching lost, that's okay. But if not, you're a small group. You're a small group that does discovery questions for your small group. You're not exactly like a team trying to reach people, which that's some hard conversations that you have to have in that process to say, you can still keep doing this, but we're going to call you a small group right now, because you're not a part of this strategy of sort of reaching lost people. You're not interested, which you could say they're not really doing discovery group if they're not interested in any lost people, because they're probably not answering the last question about who you're going to share this with, or which they weren't. And so we said the goal is to start churches. What we did is, some of you have maybe seen this. These are old graphics, which we've changed a little bit, especially because the baptism was apparently being baptized in a tsunami. Like the largest waves in the history of a baptismal pool. But we walk people through and say, this is what it means to be a church. Like you're a discovery group until you're a church, and becoming a church has meaning. Like it's not, you don't just get to say you're a church because you say you're a church. We'll walk you through a process with your group to become a church, which this is a part of the training. But this I think helped, because in some of the microchurch world, I would say, I've noticed people say like, hey, we volunteer at an after school program, so we're a microchurch. Like, well, I don't know if that is a micro. I don't know if that's a church. I think we volunteer in an after school program, which is good, but I don't know if Jesus thinks that's a church or not. I'm not really sure. I think there are things that like a church is something. It's not just like, hey. I remember one time visiting some guys, me and Paco. We were trying to learn, and we went and we ate tacos. It was just 2 of them and 3 of us. And he's like, church can be anything. This is church. This is our church for the week. We're like, this was your church for the week? We just ate tacos. And he's like, yeah. So we kind of say that can be church. That can be a thing a church does. But if the group of people has no sense that they are church, or they don't believe they're a church, it's interesting to ask, and Jim, you probably know more, to see in different movements what people, it's like tipping points. The movement I've been closest to is the one in Cuba. And in Cuba, they have certain moments. It's fun to go to some parts of Cuba. I've been in Havana, and you can walk, I remember being in the neighborhood of Havana on a hillside, and you can just hear singing out of all these different apartments, because there's all these house groups that are meeting. But even with that, they'll say oh, we're a church when this happens. They have something that, I don't know, it feels to me like there's something spiritual about crossing the Rubicon, that we are not a random group of friends. We are the Church of the Living Christ. There's something that I think happens in that moment. And so it's not going to happen in day one. You have to coach people to that. And probably literally each movement has a slightly different way of saying that is. We like to say there's universality with that. I don't think there is, but this is just what we settled on, partly because just the leadership of our church was comfortable with it. So we said, these are the things we want to see happen. Maybe you've seen this in some of the habits training. We walk people through the little dotted line and say, you're a group. When we have a dotted line, and you start saying, what are the things that we do? And if you realize, like in this example, hey, we never take the Lord's Supper ever. Okay, well, let's learn how to do the Lord's Supper together. That'll be fun for you guys, for the first time ever, to just do the Lord's Supper together. Or we don't really leverage our resources in any way, which is, we don't, not just tithing, but we don't give. We're not generous towards each other, or we don't have any kind of leadership that we would say, this is an elder of some sort. Or we reached each other, but we have no vision to reach beyond ourselves, which is what that symbol is supposed to be communicating. And then we'll say, we'll close it. Once you're a church, and that's when we'll sort of close the circle. So we walk people through like what that would look like. The goal is sort of to multiply and to see that not just happen. The goal is not one, which is, I've discovered, is really hard. It's so much work to get one started, which you guys probably know that it's so exciting and so hard to get just one started that without meaning to, oftentimes in your first one, you killed any chance of multiplying it because you did so many things in the getting one to start that everything you did will stop it from ever becoming two. And I know that for myself, like the first person that when I first learned, I thought this guy's a person of peace, I'm going to his house, is awesome. Like drove out demons, like his daughter, like was struggling with evil spirits, and these like crazy things happened. It was so exciting, and I just did everything wrong. Like I way overspoke. The teacher in me, the pastor in me, talked way too much, didn't shut up enough, till eventually people just started calling it Chris's group. They're like, we should go to Chris's group. And when Chris couldn't go to Chris's group, nobody went. And I was like, dang, I did everything they said not to do. And now I know why they say that, because I killed any hope of this group ever multiplying. But it's like so exciting to get one started. So we have to constantly reinforce, like there are things that you do in the way of getting one started that are going to stop this from ever becoming more than one. And we have really learned that the hard way. It's like one of the ladies she's such a good teacher. She found a lady they've been praying for, just like prayer walking, cold, lost person, got into an apartment, began to pray, began to study the word together, and then like kind of settled, hey, let's like regularly meet, became like a real formal discovery group. And in one of her lessons, I remember in our coaching session, she came back and said, I did this like amazing craft about our testimonies. I was like, you did an amazing craft? I'm like, that's great because you're a school teacher, but are they gonna ever be able to do the amazing craft that you did? Because if they can't, they're gonna be like, wow, we love it when this sister comes to our house because she does amazing crafts, and then is never multiplied. And they love it because this lady who is an actual great teacher comes in and does a great job teaching, but because of that, no, it's totally unreproducible. So we have to reinforce the goal is not one, the goal is to multiply, and we do that through the hub. I don't know how long I've been talking for, so if it's time for me to shut up, I would say a couple things. We create like a covenant. We have people sign a covenant if they're going to join, and we're pretty clear about what their expectations are. It's like a job description that you can quit after a year. You can say like, I'm in and I'm out. And so we have a covenant that we'll say, these are our commitments. So this is like the commitments for missionaries. And then we spell them out a little bit farther down the road of what that means. So even as you take people through the habits training, we have found that it's helpful to give people who are busy and who are bivocational like clear expectations of what that means. That was something I think we learned from the first group. Like, we're expecting you to pray this amount of time. We're expecting you to dedicate time to engaging lost people, which is going to look like, this is like almost like your job description, and you're like coveting with other people to say we're gonna do this. This is going to be our lifestyle, because otherwise we noticed that it was just too hard it just didn't happen if you didn't make time for it. I realized there's a group of people called Mission Year. Some of you maybe have ever heard of Mission Year. It's like almost like a gap year program. And in their like schedule of Mission Year, we would have a team that would come to a little village every year. And they had built into their schedule one day to only be with neighbors. That was the official assigned activity of the day, was just to hang out with neighbors, like be locally present at your house and walk around. And they didn't know about DMM or think about DMM, but they always would reach people, like every single time. And it was just because they built into their actual schedule, this is the day we purposely look. And if you don't find any, but invite neighbors over to your house, have dinner with them, like really be intentional and build it into your actual schedule. And especially for Christians who are leaders, who are busy, kids, soccer, baseball, a million things. It's almost like if you don't say, we're going to do it, and this is when we're going to do it, my hunch is it will just never ever happen. Which is my own experience, that it was never happening for me. It's too busy. So, and then we make commitments as an art organization, as our non-official organization, saying, and this is what we commit to you. We commit to be praying for you, commit to train you, we commit to walk together with you, which I feel like is a little bit bigger than just training, like relational connection. We'll give you coverage for your work, and we're going to invest in you, in your health. And so, retreats, like we'll do a retreat together and say, this year we're going to do some type of retreat. Let's all get together with the family and get away somewhere and just spend time and invest in each other. So it's really almost like creating a little very light mission organization within your own church. That's how we've done it. And there's a little bit more about finances and things like that, which I could get into, but I'll just stop and let you ask some questions if you have any. We've seen quite a bit more kind of headway this way. I think right now there's like 10 that meet on any given week that will call themselves churches and that meet together as churches. And some of those have gotten into another generation. We're not a movement. We don't have any fourth generation. We don't have any third generation. We have maybe third generation individuals, but not groups. But it feels like COVID both took the wind out of our sails for a couple of years, but also opened a door where a lot of people were like willing to try something that they weren't willing to try before. They also just got used to that we were changing all the time because we had to. Chicago had pretty strict rules about how you can meet as a church. So it's almost like it built up like a little bit of callus. If you like weightlift, the first time you do it, your hands like bleed and you can't walk for a week. And if you do it eventually, you get like calluses and you can lift the bar and it doesn't hurt. I feel like people got like callous to change. They were like, wow, okay, we're reinventing the wheel again. I guess that's what we're doing this month. And the nice thing as pastors is it wasn't our fault. It was like, hey, this is just what the mayor says, we got to do it, so we're just gonna have to. So it created in people like a willingness to change and an openness to try new things, while at the same time it made it really difficult to engage with lost people because lost people in our neighborhood were not super excited with having close contact with strangers. Like, we don't want strangers to talk to us. But we feel good. We feel like we have structure that's set up for those who are already doing it, for those who'd like to join in, also for those like lines into Mexico or into other countries. We feel like we have a way to say, this is what it'll look like. Yeah, you can join us. You can be a part of the New Life Missions Hub, and that we'll train you in how to do church. And if you want to be a part of us, you can do it, but you have to do it like this. We can't start like a brick and mortar church, but if you want to join us and you want to belong to us, this is a way you can do that. So feel like we're set up well for kind of the way it'll go. And there's a whole bunch of other little details in terms of like finances, but yeah, I'll just kind of stop.
Okay, now here's what we're going to do. Thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, let's thank him. And you can turn off the camera. Okay.